Today's Excel video is going to cover the stuff that we can do to transform numerical data and also to get some summary measures and to bin numerical data. And so to do that, we're going to be working with the customers data set again. So if I come over here to customers and go down to the name of the worksheet down at the bottom, I'm going to right click on that and create another worksheet that I would like to have right next to it. And this worksheet I'm going to rename. Let's go ahead and call this customers stats, or whatever you want. In here, the first thing I'm going to talk about is percentiles and how you get a percentile. And I'm going to be planning on using these percentiles to bin my data. Because if you remember, there's 3 different ways to bin data. One is based on percentiles, where we have a certain equal frequency in each bin. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and bin spending 2018. So we're going to get the percentiles in here. So I'm just going to copy this over and I'm putting it in column A. I want to get some information about that. So let's put the percentiles here. And I want to go ahead and identify the quantile with each that's associated with each of the, I guess I'll keep it singular. We're going to do the quantile associated with the percentile. Okay. So let's go ahead and begin with the 10th quartile. The 10th percentile. So that would be 0.1. And since I want to build this, I'm going to go ahead and add, I'm going to select the previous cell and I'm going to add 0.1 to it. So I get 0.2, and then I'm going to go ahead and come on down. I'm just going to guess here real quick. I guess I need one more to get all the way up to all of the deciles in my data. So let's use deciles, and I'm going to convert this on the Homes tab to percent. All right, so when I use this to get those quantiles, and let me go ahead and add 0 here. I think 0 will be good to have. That's going to be the minimum in the data, so there's nothing below it. We're going to use this function called percentile, and notice there's percentile EXC for exclusive, and below that is percentile INC for inclusive. The inclusive one is the one that includes the 0 and the 1, or the 0% and the 100%. So that's the one we're going to want to use. So I'm going to select that, and below it we get this little reminder of how to use it. The first thing that we need is an array. What this mainly means is the input for what we're going to get the percentile of, and then the K is going to be what percentile we want. So in here for the percentile, I'm going to, in my formula bar, have that selected. So I have a flashing black vertical line, and I'm going to come over to customers, and I'm going to select the spending 2018, and then I'm going to put a comma and come back over to customer stats and select the percentile right next to it. So if I hit this, I get the 0th percentile, which is the minimum in my data, and I can just double check that I used the formula right because I do know how to use minimum. So actually, let's go ahead back over here on the quantile and make the reference to that column of data an absolute reference. So when we refer to it, we won't have to go back and keep having to reselect it. Okay. So let's say we have this here, and I want to confirm that this is actually going to give me the minimum, that I'm using the formula correctly. So I'm going to copy this over, and this is just a quick check. I move this here, and I see, uh-oh, it's trying to do percentile, and I don't even care about that. I want it to be, I'm selecting the whole function name, I'm retyping in min, and then I'm going to erase this whole part right here because I just want the min of that column. And I see it is 50. So that confirms that worked. I can actually now delete this. This was just a sanity check. Okay, so now that we know this works, I'm going to go ahead and click the autofill little green square, and I see I get now my deciles of my data, the quantile, where those cuts are. And I can now use this to I will be using this to build bins. But first I want to talk about how we want to perhaps get some other summary statistics. We talked also about getting quartiles. So let's say I want to get quartiles of our data. Let's say I want to get the Q1, which is our 25th percentile, and Q2 is our 50th percentile, and Q3 is our 75th percentile. And might as well just go ahead and put those here. And we can just manually build this if we wanted to, using the same function that we used above here. So here I'm going to put in the percentile that I'm going to need. So this is 0.25, oops. So here I'm going to put what I need, which is 0.25, then 0.5, and 0.75. And then I can use this function here and see if that's going to work for me. So I can highlight this function and see it is pointing to that column of data, which we set as an absolute reference, and then it's pointing to the relative reference, which is whatever the percentile is just to the left of where I have this function, and that gives me this quartile. I can also use the Excel function for quartile. And actually, let me just bring this on down. So now we have the quartiles, first, second, and third quartiles. I can also come in here and instead use the quartile function. It also has the exclusive and inclusive options because it's really actually built off the same code under the hood, as it were, as the percentiles are. So it's just a wrapper for the percentile function to make that a little bit easier. So we're going to go ahead and pick the inclusive version, and we're going to, again, select our data for customers. So let's say I select that data, and then I'm going to put a comma. And notice that now it's telling me the information that we were just reviewing, which is that the first quartile is a 25th percentile, and I would put a 1, 2 for the median value or the 50th percentile, and a 3 for the third quartile. So since I want the first one, I'm going to put a 1 here and then close parentheses. And you see we get the same number. So we are able to get those quartiles just using this function. So for the second one, I'm going to make that a 2. And for the third one, I'll make that a, so I come up to the formula bar and change that to a 3. So you see we match. Now, if I wanted to, I'm going to use this version of it that has the absolute reference to the column. I don't need to do any of this. I can just go right to getting the quartiles. So I'm going to come up here, actually erase this. I'm going to copy this over to this spot. And I'm going to fix it up here by changing this to the quartile function. I'm just going to do it directly. Oops. And I shouldn't hit enter. And then I got to change this to a 1. something, it didn't like something. Oh, because I didn't have the whole function here, quartile. There we go. All right. So now that that's an absolute reference, I can copy it down, and this is probably the fastest way to get these quartiles in here to be what I want them to be without all this extra work. Because all that extra work is really just instructional to you so you know what's going on. So now that we've done the quartiles and the deciles, let's talk about getting the summary statistics for this variable, the spending 2018 variable. And one way that we can do that is letting Excel generate them for us. And I want to show you how to do that because it'll save you some time from having to do each one manually. So if I go over here to, actually, I could start where I was, but let's go back over to customers, and we're going to get summary statistics on the spending 2018. I go up here to the data tab, and I come over here to data analysis, and there's many options. I'm going to choose descriptive statistics. It's going to want my input range. So for this input range, I'm going to select this jth column, and then it's going to group by either columns or rows, and I'm fine with columns. I'm going to have this labels in the first row, and then I'm going to also check summary statistics. But for the output range, let's figure out where we're going to put that. I don't know why it's filling already, but let's go in and select that, and notice the black bar is blinking there. So now I'm free to come over to this worksheet and click on customer stats, and I'm going to choose to put it here. And then I come back here and I can say okay. So notice that now it's given me a whole bunch of summary statistics for this variable. And in here we have the mean, standard error, median, the mode, the standard deviation, the sample variance, the kurtosis and skewness. So these are measures of the shape we may come back to at some point. But for right now, we're kind of glossing over them. And we are looking now at the range, the min, the max, the sum, and the count. And we certainly don't care for this variable so much about the sum, but that's okay. It wants to give it to us anyway. Let's go down and from this, pull out the measures of dispersion that we talked about. So just format this. So the first measure of dispersion that we talked about was the range, and that's here. So I'm just going to copy it down so I can have all my measures of dispersion in one place. The second one we talked about was the interquartile range. And to get the interquartile range, we are going to need to build that. Excel doesn't actually just calculate it for us. So we're going to build it by taking the third quartile and subtracting the first quartile. And that gives us that interquartile range. The next one I told you about was the mean absolute deviation, which is otherwise known as MAD. And we are going to first build this directly from our data set. So we talked about absolute deviations before. And what we're going to be talking about now is the mean absolute deviation. So going over here to customers, what we want is the difference between each of the values and the mean, which we have right here in our customer stats worksheet. And we're going to take the absolute value of that, and then we're going to get the mean of all of those. So to do that, we're going to need to add another column. And I'm just going to call this the absolute deviations from the mean. Just so I can read it, I'm going to wrap the text on that. So what we're going to do here is go ahead and set up this column of data. So let's set this as equal the absolute value of the difference between this number and the mean. So I'm going to subtract off of this the mean. And when I look at this formula, I know that I want to copy it down to every row of data. So I want to go ahead and make this B23 an absolute reference. Put dollar signs on that and hit enter. Okay. So now I have this, the difference between this number and the mean, and I'm going to use the autofill to bring that down. Okay. Now back in the customer stats worksheet, I'm now going to take the mean of those absolute values. So I use the average function, and I'm going to come back over to customers, and I'm going to select the absolute deviations from the mean and get the mean absolute deviation. Okay. There is another way in Excel to do this, and now that we've built it and you know how to build it, I think you probably are going to want to use the function, but you definitely want to understand and know what's in it, so it's not just a black box kind of thing. So this function, if you're not sure if a function exists, I want to go through how you find one. So let's say you wonder, could Excel possibly do this for me? So we could go up to formulas, and then over on the left it says insert function. So I'm going to click on that, and up here in this little gray box, I'm going to just type what I'm looking for, mean absolute deviation. And I get a function is found, some recommendations, and if there's more than one, you could read through them and see which is the one you are the most interested in, if any of them meet your needs. For this one, AVE dev, average dev, returns the average of the absolute deviations of the data points from their mean. Okay, so that's perfect. That's what we want. So we're going to say okay. And in here, in the first input, we need to put in our data. So we're going to come over to customers, and we are going to select spending. So we're going to eventually here get rid of this column that we made in K because it was just, again, instructional, or the build, if you will. So now we're going to say okay here, and you see that we're able to immediately get that mean absolute deviation value. And I'm just going to make this, I'm going to move this over because I want to get rid of K, that column K that I made, just to show you that this function is giving us, basically we went under the hood and looked at what this function's doing. That's what it's doing. So now I can get rid of this K column. I don't really need it. All right, we have a function that does that for us. So that's great. That puts us in a good place. Okay. Now we're going to build now that we've talked about measures of dispersion, we're going to start building bins. And I want to show you 3 different ways to build bins. The first one that we're going to do is based just on what we've done so far, which is these deciles. So let's go ahead and go over here to customers, and we're going to now go to we're going to now add a deciles column, which would actually be a new variable in our data set. So let's say it's going to be called deciles of spend 2018. And again, just to keep us clear on what where it is, we're going to go ahead and wrap that text so we read the whole thing. And in here, what I want to do is I want to put in what decile is 241 in. So let's think about what we want that number to be. So the first thing you're going to do is think about what you want the result to be, and does it make sense? So 241, let's come over here to the deciles, and let's look at what we mean by 241. So 241 is between 171 and 300, right? So it's between these two, and it's bucketed between them. And we have values that are below 171, right, between 50 and 171.1. And we're going to say that those are in the 10th percentile. So this one we actually wanted to be in the 20th percentile. Now the tricky thing is that index match has the option of looking at data when the number is, when the cut here, the quantile, is less than the value. So for example, that 241, we want it to be we want it to match and return a 10% as the decile that it lands in. And in order to do that, we're going to have to do a little maneuvering here because index match wants to look across rows. So right now, the 10% has a 171.1 next to it, and what we actually wanted is to have the 50. So I'm going to take the values that are here for these quantiles that we found with this function, and I'm going to copy them one step down, but I'm going to copy them only by putting the numbers there. I don't want any of those numbers to change, and I don't need these functions that we use to get them. Okay, so now we have this in-between step, and that's going to be what we're going to use to build our bins variables in this case. So coming back over here, now that we know we expect this to be a 20%, let's see if we can program that in. So I'm going to use index, and the very first thing that I want when I use the index match function is what is the output? Where is the output that I want showing up here? And what I want are percentages. So the output I want there is given by this set of numbers. Whoops, let me make sure we get them all. Now I'm going to put a comma in my formula, and I'm going to select the one. So this is where the match part comes in. Coming back over to customers, I'm going to select the one that was the spending in 2018 on this row, and it's a very annoying aspect of building these functions is I can't just click just to the left. It wants to show me the whole current state of what I've typed. So I have to actually come up here and type J2 up here. So I'm going to match that value. And I want the value from the lookup table that is less than or equal to this value. So this is going to be where I'm going to use the 50 all the way up to this value here. And if the value in here, these quantile values, is less than or equal to the lookup value, it's going to give me the corresponding value for the decile. And because I want to consider the less than, I'm going to put the 1 in, and then I need a second parenthesis. So if this worked, I got the 20%, which I did. It's not formatted right, but it looks right. Let's change that to a format. And now I'm going to go ahead and use autofill. Oh, you know what? It's really important that we make these absolute references. So I'm going to come back up here and make sure that when I'm pulling anything from the customer stats lookup table, that it is going to be an absolute reference. Here, make that an absolute reference. Okay. Now that should still say 20%, but the rest of them now should be right. Okay. Let's check to see if these values give us what we expect them to be. So we see 843, and the way we coded it is giving us 70%. 70th decile. So let's go 7th decile, if you will, 70th percentile. Let's go make sure 843 is where we want it to be. So 843 is below the 70th percentile, or the 7th decile, and therefore it is binned in the group that's above 60 but below 70. So 70 is what we want it to be, so that worked. Usually just checking one other one is sufficient. Let's go with maybe a 90th percentile. Let's see if the top end is working. So we see the value is 1079. Coming over to customer stats, we see that 1079 is above 80 and below 90, so we would want it binned with the 9th decile or the 90th percentile. So coming over here to customer, we do see that it is in the right one. So that looks good. Um, I am calling these deciles but I'm referring to them by percentiles, and that's because most people think of them that way. So I think if you were to be really, really precise, you'd call this the 9th decile, but technically it's the 90th percentile, and that's usually the way people refer to it. So now that we've been able to bin our data here by deciles, what we expect is that each of the bins has an equal number of observations in it. That's what we meant by so binning. This is the binning with equal frequency or counts. Okay, and we can just check that. So to check the frequency, what we're going to do is come over here and use the frequency function. So we're going to type frequency and then pick our data, which is the deciles column. And coming back over to customer stats, we are going to select the column of values. Then I'm going to hit enter, and we see that we are automatically generated all the frequencies in this column of data. It knew to do that for us. They were mainly all 20, except for the 20th bin actually came out to 19 observations. So there's sometimes just a little bit of rounding that happens when you do this. And it does its best, but we were able to almost get 20 in each bin. The next type of binning that I want to demonstrate is how to bin with custom cuts. So binning with custom bounds. And for this one, I'm going to focus on income as being the variable that I'm going to be considering. So let's go ahead. I'm going to come down here and let's get some summary statistics on income, just so we know what we're dealing with income. So let's come over to income. Actually, we got to go over to data and data analysis and descriptive stats. And this time what we're going to do is select income. Everything else will be the same, except the output range will be a new place. That will be, I'm going to go ahead and put it down here on the same row as the other one was, but just below income. And I'm going to say okay. So now we can see, I wanted to get the min and the max and kind of see what we were talking about. So we go from 31,000 to 167,000. So now that we have the summary statistics, let's come up here and make our custom cuts in our data. Because of the way index match works, and we've already talked about that, we want the lower end. So let's say we're going to cut it 0 and 50,000 and 100,000. So what we're going to say here then, let's build this a little slower. Labels. And let's say the label for this is going to be low. And just for our understanding, we're not actually going to use the range on what we mean, but what we mean is from 0 to 49,999 will be a low income range. And starting at 50,000, we'll call that medium. And that will be from 50,000 to 100,000. We would like maybe to put that together that way. I'll show you how to do that. And then starting at 101,000, we'll call that high. So that's going to be, I'm going to put a little apostrophe, so I can put in a math formula, but it'll actually just type it for me. It won't actually try to do a math formula. So I'm going to say greater than 100K is what we mean by a high income here. Okay, so now that we have this set up, let's go over and create this new binning variable in our data. Coming back over to customers, and I'm going to choose the column just to the right of income and insert another column here. I'm going to call this income categories. Income categories. And once again, I'm going to use the wrap function just so I can get this all to fit. And we're going to use the index match. So you guys are going to become experts in index match here. So again, what I want this to say is either low, medium, or high based on this 53,000 income. So coming over to customer stats, I'm going to choose the labels that I want as the first input to the index match function. And now I'm going to match on. What I want to match on is going to be that H2. So this will be H2. And I'm going to match that up with the option of 1. So what I would like to do is have these are going to be my values that I'm going to use for that. And I'm going to use a less than option on this. And that came up with medium, which is what we want. All right, so now we can just double check real quick if we want that it was medium that we wanted. So we can come over here and we see that medium is going to be between 50,000 and 100,000, and that's what we wanted for medium. So that's working. So we're ready to copy it down, but we have to make sure we remember to make these absolute references. If not, we're going to get all kinds of weird errors because it's going to not be pointing to the right place. So now that we did that, now let's use this autofill and fill up these categories. Now, one way to check if if this did it right, especially since we have so few categories, would be to sort by categories. But you have to be really careful when you do index match that you don't mess up the way the index match works. It's very picky. So if you're going to sort, I would recommend that after you've used index match to create labels, that you actually copy them over themselves. So the way I would do that is I'd select the first one, go to the very bottom, select the last one, and I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to copy it back over itself, but with a number. So I'm getting rid of the index match formula that was there. So now I can go in and I can sort this data. I can just go to data and I can hit sort, and I'm going to sort by income. And I'm going to check if my income categories came out right. So low should go up to 50,000, and starting at 50,000 it goes to medium, so that worked. Now let's come on down and see what happened with high income category, if that worked. That also worked. So at 100,000 it was still considered a medium because that's how we set it up. And at 101,000 it was now labeled a high income, which is probably not really accurate in the real world, but that's okay. We're just learning how to make these cuts. Okay, now we may want to know how many of each of these we had. So the way we could get that, we can get the frequency of each manually is something called a COUNTIF function. So we're going to use COUNTIF, and COUNTIF is going to allow us to count something according to some condition. So I want to count if, and I have to use quotes here, count how many times the input there says low. So I hit enter and it says 34. And because I chose the entire column, I don't need an absolute reference. I can just copy it down. So I'm going to copy this down to the next two. And I'm going to come into the medium one and change the word to medium. And then I'm going to check, get the word right down here for uh, the high income by changing that. So we see we have 34, 146, and 20. The next kind of binning that we're going to do is we're going to bin with equal width bins. So this will be binning with equal width. And the variable that we're going to look at for that is the days since the last order. So days since, and I think it has a different, it's got some abbreviated. So we'll figure that out here in a second. Let's bold, put a little underline on it. And let's come over here to customers. It's called days since last officially, but okay. What we're going to need in order to decide how to bin it with equal widths is the range in our data, and then decide how many of those we want. So let's come down here, and also we're going to get the summary statistics for that variable. So let's come back over here to customers, and to once again go up to the data tab, go over to data analysis. It's defaulted back to what we chose the last time, which was descriptive statistics. Now it opens up this little GUI, and it's choosing, you know, it remembers what we did last time. So now we're going to have it redo it for us again. So we're going to, I'm going to slide that over. And I'm going to choose this column of data. Everything else is the same, except I want it in a new place in my output range. I'm going to delete what was here. And instead, I'm going to pick right here as my location. So that seemed to work. So now that we are looking at a range of 354 from the max to the min, and we want to bin equal widths, we need to think about how we want to do this. And there's certainly many different ways we can do it. We know the minimum is 6 and it goes up to 360. So we could start with 0 and have equal widths. That's one way we could do it. So for example, we can put our cuts in our data. And again, we're going to start with the lowest number. Let's say we decide we're going to go with 0. And we want to get up to 360 and in some reasonable number of bins. We don't want to go crazy and have, like, you know, count by twos here or something. But maybe we can count by 60. So I think if we count by 60, it'll work. Let's see. So we're going to add to the previous one 60. So I choose the previous one. Oops. And I'm going to add 60. Let's see if I copy this down, if I get to 360. Oops. I did. I shot way past it. That's okay. Let me come up here to 420, to 780. I'll just clear those out. Okay. So these are going to be the lower bound of our cuts of what we're trying to accomplish here. And we could kind of call these the lower bound of the equal size bins, and we could go to the upper bounds, and that would be, it's going to be equal to 1 down and over minus 1, right? Since we're counting in days and those are whole numbers, I'm just going to subtract 1 day off of there. Okay. So now I'm going to copy that down, and that's going to give me these bins correctly. And then for the last one, oh, we're actually not going to go all the way. We're at 360. You realize the mistake I made? I'm thinking, yeah, I want to go all the way up to 360, but let's make the lower bound 1 instead of 0. And then we just shifted everything so that the formula automatically adjusted. I can get rid of this very last one because there's nothing past 360 here. And so now we have everything binned. So the days since the last order is not going to be 0 anyway. Our minimum is 6. So this will work as equal size bins. And then we can actually use this to make labels. So we can have the labels for our bins. And we can use concatenate function. And what it's going to do is create a text field that we built. So I'm going to pick, say, it's from 1, and then I'm going to do this little dash in the middle, and with a little space on either side of the dash, and then I'm going to choose the upper bound here. And now it's going to say 1 to 60. And I'm going to copy that down, so now I have my labels for each of my bins. All of this stuff, maybe it would be nice to make it all centered anyway. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and use these labels as our binning labels, and we're going to use the lower bound because we're going to use index match. And for index match, remember, we always use the lower bound to help build our binning. So coming back over to customers, right here next to days since last, column O, I'm going to insert another column of data, and I'm going to call it binned days, just whatever. Okay, so now we're going to build this. So let's say we're going to start with index match again. So do index, and what we want it to say is one of these labels, comma, and we're going to pick the one that matches or is less than the bound, that the bound is less than the number. So for the bound, so the match, sorry, come over to customers, the bound, the lookup value is the days since last. So that's going to be our N2. And our match that we're going to match on is going to be the lower bound here. So these values here. And we're going to say as long as that number is less than, give it this label. All right, so we're all set there. The only thing that we've learned now, right, is that it's starting to sink in that we need to always make these index match lookup table values absolute references. Okay. Great. So we see that 280 does land between 241 to 300. Okay, let's try and see if this works. 14 does land between 1 and 60, so it is working. We were able to successfully bin our data. The next thing that we've covered in chapter 3, section 5, is identifying using box plots where there are outliers, and this is also part of the chapter 2, data wrangling. We talked about it a few times, and finding outliers. So if we go over here to income, maybe we want to know if there's any outliers in income. So one way we can do this is we can select this data in income and choosing, I can also, I can select all this data by selecting the first cell and then going down to the bottom. Now, if you have a lot of data, that may not be the best way to do this. Another way we can do this is we can format this data range, all this data that we're looking at here, as a table. So let's say I want to format this as a table. And I say, yes, my data has headers. And I say, okay. So now that we have this formatted as a table, what we can do is select all the income automatically by moving our cursor up until we see this little solid black arrow pointing down, and that's going to choose all the data and exclude the header, which is great because now we can go over here and insert, and it will leave that header out and allow us to choose from this statistical tables, we can choose the box and whisker. And this one we can choose where we'd like to put it. I'm going to move this table over to customer stats for income. So I'm going to hit Control X, come over to customer stats, come down below income. I'm going to put this here. And I can shrink it up and I can see my income outliers. It looks like I have 2 outliers. And if I hover over them, it tells me that the value is at 167 and 148. So it would appear that the cutoff, here you can point to the top of the whisker, and the whisker is at, let me see if I can find it again. You gotta play around, 136,000. So we could come back over here to customers, and we can do what's called conditional formatting on this table. And we can say we're going to highlight anything that's greater than 136,000. Okay? And scroll down to the bottom, and it will find those values for us. So let's go back and look at those highlight again. So the top of that whisker was 136,000. We have a 148 here and 167 here. So what did it find? So there was hidden in there 151 that didn't really show up here. So I wonder if it was there. See, if we zoomed in a little bit more, we would be able to see it. So this is the back and forth that exploratory data analysis is. It's like we found that there were some outliers, and we use the top of the whisker to go back and do a conditional formatting. And then the conditional formatting implied that we actually have 3 outliers here. So in order to determine what to do with those, now know at least how to find them, and then you can use that to decide if they are, get a count of outliers and how to decide which ones, what you're going to do about them. The next thing that I'm going to cover is the category reduction. So for the category reduction, I'm going to come over here to race. I'm going to look at what all my categories are. And I see that, sorry, I didn't mean to select birth date. Just look at race. Okay, so we have American Indian, Asian, Black, Hispanic, Pacific Islander, and white. So let's go ahead and decide that we want to reduce our categories here. And we're going to group American Indian and Pacific Islander together as other. So we're going to make another column of data, which we're going to use for category reduction. So let me insert that column, and I'm going to rename it race 2. So let's build this backwards. So to add this race, what we want to do is we want to group the Pacific Islander and the American Indian. And so let's find that first. So we're going to say this is equal to or, and this is how we have multiple things that can be true. So we're going to say or this cell is equal to American Indian, comma, oops, close the quote, comma, or this cell is equal to Pacific Islander. Close the quote. So we're going to close this function, and we see that we get all false. And we do get some true, so let's just make sure it works. So we're going to select on just true. See that these do appear to be American Indian and Pacific Islander, so that worked. All right, so let's go back and select everything. So now that we know that we've been able to select, and it gives us false or true if the race is one of these categories, now we're going to put another wrapper function around the outside of this. We're going to say, okay, if it's true, Then what we're going to do, put a comma at the end because we're going to now put in the value if true. So I'm following along with this guidance of what goes here. Another way I could do this is I can use this little function X button and it'll open the GUI for me. So I have this OR statement, and then I want to know what the value I'm going to do if it's true. So if it's American Indian or Pacific Islander, I'm going to put in other. Otherwise, I'm going to put the value that was in that cell. So I'm going to keep what was in that cell. And now I can hit OK, and you can see that I automatically, because I formatted as a table, I don't have to do the autofill. It will automatically do it for me. And I can now come in here and I can select other. I can see that the only things left are the ones I wanted to remain. And I'm going to check other. And now I see it did in fact work. So now we're going to create dummy variables. And for this, I'm going to come over to the last variable in our data set, which is channel. And I'm going to create a dummy variable, dummy variables from the values in this categorical variable. So first thing I want to see is how many there are and what are they. So I see here that there's 4. So I'm going to create 4 dummy variables. And let's just go ahead and start with referral, the first one on the list. So we're going to come up here and type referral. And notice that because I had it formatted as a table, the Excel was automatically adding now this column to the table. Now what I'm going to do for this is basically it's going to be a 0. So let's just do a few manually. It's going to be 0 if it's referral, and it's not. That's in the column of channel. So we're converting channel. So I could actually call this maybe more accurately channel underscore referral. So see what would happen if I make this a wrap. Will I get a little bit, do a little bit shorter? Okay, that sort of works. Okay, so if channel is referral, we're going to put a 1. But, so these are 0, 0. This is 0. This is 0, and then this should be a 1. Oops. And this should be a 1. Can't type. Okay, there we go. So you get the idea. So we basically just want to, that's why we're calling these indicator variables or dummy variables. They're just going to be a 1 or a 0, and they're going to tell us when channel is the value, in this case, referral. The way I can do this automatically is I can say equals if this cell is equal to referral. And it's typed. That's a problem. Okay, I get you. I get you. All right, let's take out that F. And if it is referral, we're going to put a 1, otherwise put a 0. And that's all there is to it. If I had not already started part of the way down here, sorry, if I had not already started part of the way down, I would have automatically got this formula for me. Okay, and so we would do basically the same thing for the next one. So we could just say channel underscore, and I don't remember what the next one was in the list, but I'm going to just go by the ones I can see here, web. And again, let's wrap that text. And we're going to use the same kind of format. We're going to say if this, whoops, come back over here. If, open parentheses, if this cell value is equal to web, then it's going to be a 1. Otherwise, it's going to be a 0. And I'll get that automatically set up for us. Every time it's a web, it matches. So one easy way to check that you've put it in right is like, let's come up to channel and we're going to just select referral. And so referral should all be ones in referral. And instead, let's check web. And web should all be ones and 0 in referral. So far, so good. Okay, let's clear that filter. So we're going to select all, or you can also just clear filter. Like that's the other way to do it really quick. So now the next thing that we have to do is add a third. If you remember that we're going to make one less than the number of categories. So in channel, we have 4 categories, so we're going to make 3 dummy variables. And one of the things we haven't talked about yet is that we have to decide which one of these is going to be the reference. And we probably should have done that right off the bat initially. So I'm going to go ahead and let TV be the reference. So the only one left now to do is SM, which I believe is standard mail. So for that one, let's go ahead and make another dummy variable, the third that we need and the last that we need. So channel underscore standard mail. And again, let's wrap that text and copy over this formula. And come back up in here on the formula bar. We're going to edit this to say SM. So now you see that it automatically updated everything. Let's do a check on TV, because we want TV to be zeros across everything. So we see we can check on the filter dropdown, what are the options for TV, and for these dummy variables we created, and they're all set to 0. So everything looks good for this right now. All set on our dummy variable. The next and final thing I want to show you how to do is how to make category scores out of category labels for the categorical variable satisfaction. I have it up there already. Hold on, let me erase that. Let's start that again. Okay, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to insert a space for that. And I'm going to call it satisfaction cat score. Okay. And once again, I should have just picked the whole row and set it all to wrap text, but here we go. So for this, what we're going to do is use a lookup table. We could do a really long nested if, where you use if and then have an kind of a nesting of ifs, and that's another approach you may have been taught at some point. But I think it gets really confusing in Excel to do that. It's not ideal. So I'm going to come over here to customer stats, and I'm going to make set up a category scores. So here I went ahead and set it up. So I put them in order: very dissatisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, neutral, somewhat satisfied, and very satisfied. And I gave them scores 1 to 5 with increasing satisfaction. So now I'm coming back over to customers, and this is going to be our last lookup table in this video. So this one, hopefully by now you're getting how it works. So I'm going to say index, we're going to use index match. We're going to come over to customer stats, and we're going to say, okay, we want it to be a number. So we always select for index what we want the output to be. Put a comma, and then we're going to match on the word from our data. So our word from our data is going to be satisfaction. So it's going to do this weird thing. Okay, let me just go with Q2. Sometimes when you use a table format, you're able to look things up in a little bit more intuitive of a way, but that's okay. We're just going to go with Q2 as the match value and put a comma. And now I'm coming back over to the lookup table, and these are the words that I'm going to try to match on for that variable. And it automatically filled everything in for me because that's what the table format will do. You don't have to do the autofill, and it did it before I had a chance to set these lookup table references to be absolute references with $signs so that the cell reference to row and column are frozen. And they're not going to change as they get copied down. So let me go ahead and do that as well for this match part. Now it will update all the numbers for me. And we can do just a quick check on that. Like we can go to neutral and make sure those are all threes. Just by coming over here, we see they are. And you can check a few more if you'd like. Okay, so that's it for all the stuff that was covered up until exam 1.